"Get that civilian off my bridge, now!" The words cracked like thunder. Admiral Rourke didn't ask who she was. He didn't care. To him, she was just a distraction, an error in the system. Delia Frost didn't argue. She closed her notebook, nodded once, and let the security escorts lead her away without a word. No resistance. No explanation. 90 minutes later, security scrambled, orders failed. The Admiral stared helplessly as the entire system collapsed before foreign eyes. Then, she walked back in. No rank, no uniform, just that black notebook. 5 seconds later, "Sovereign access granted. Welcome, Director Frost." And in that moment, everything they thought they knew shattered. The bridge was chaos. Monitors blinked red. Radios crackled with urgent voices. A junior officer knocked over a stack of mission folders in his rush to reroute communications. Somewhere near the tactical console, someone shouted, "Why are we locked out of our own system?" And in the middle of it all stood Admiral Clayton Rourke, motionless. His jaw was clenched, his eyes darting between frozen stations, and in front of him, a black screen. The words "authorization failed" pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Just beyond the Admiral, foreign observers in tailored suits and translation headsets whispered nervously in their native languages. The United States' most secure missile defense simulation, Operation Deep Signal, was falling apart in real time, in full view of international eyes. But before the alarms, before the failure, there was silence. And in that silence walked a woman named Delia Frost. Flashback. 3 hours earlier, she moved like a ghost down the carrier's inner corridor. Shoulders square, steps quiet, eyes sharp. Not rushed, not tentative, purposeful. Delia Frost didn't wear a uniform. No badge, no weapon, no clearance tags hanging from her neck. She wore a plain navy blue jacket and slacks, modest shoes, and carried nothing but a weathered black notebook in one hand and a thin pen tucked behind her ear. She passed by 3 sailors discussing refueling logistics near an open hatch. None of them acknowledged her. One of them even stepped slightly to the side to let her pass, eyes never lifting from his tablet. She didn't mind. She preferred it this way. Delia had walked through more military installations than most admirals had toured. She had studied the blueprints of these corridors long before the walls were welded shut, but she had never been invited. She had been inserted. Her instructions were always the same: blend, observe, report only if necessary. She reached the bridge at 700 hours, just as the sun began to touch the horizon beyond the steel frame windows. The light hit the consoles at just the right angle, casting cold reflections across the glossy control surfaces. No one asked for her ID. No one questioned her presence. She simply stepped around the operations team and stood just beside the navigation console, close enough to read the displays, far enough not to be noticed. She opened the notebook and began writing. She watched as Admiral Rourke entered 5 minutes later, his decorated uniform immaculate, his movements crisp and confident. She noted how he addressed his officers, respectfully, but with unquestioned command. She recorded his tone, the way he paused before giving orders, and which officers seemed eager to please versus which ones quietly doubted him. It wasn't about arrogance. It was about understanding patterns. Delia had a gift for reading a system before it broke. 2 officers passed directly in front of her, deep in conversation. One of them glanced her way, frowned slightly, then dismissed her like one might a wall fixture. Perfect. She scanned the bridge. Communication staff, tactical team, navigation, logistics support. Foreign observers would arrive in 2 hours. The operation was tightly timed. Pressure was building. Every movement mattered. And no one saw her. No one except Commander Jonas Malik. He was the only one who, for a fleeting second, hesitated as he passed. His eyes met hers. Recognition flickered, but he kept walking. Delia closed the notebook briefly and rested one hand over the cover. Sometimes the most powerful person in a room is the one who's never introduced. True power doesn't announce itself with medals or thunder. It doesn't enter with salutes or titles. It moves in silence. It watches, waits, understands the full picture before it says a single word. Delia Frost didn't wear a uniform because her authority was never something that needed to be seen. It only needed to be activated. The tension came not with sirens, but with silence. Admiral Clayton Rourke had just finished reviewing the final phase timeline of Operation Deep Signal. He stood tall at the center of the bridge, a commander in full presence, scanning every station like a general surveying a battlefield before the storm. Then he saw her. At first, his expression was unreadable, but then his brow furrowed, subtly at first, like a system detecting something that didn't belong. He didn't recognize her uniform, because she wasn't wearing one. His voice cut through the bridge like a blade drawn in a library. "Who the hell is that civilian?" Heads turned. Officers who had passed Delia Frost all morning suddenly noticed her for the first time. The operations console fell silent. Screens blinked. No one answered immediately. The woman in the plain navy jacket didn't flinch. Delia simply finished writing her last note, flipped her notebook closed with the calm of someone who'd been expecting this exact moment, and looked up. Not defiant, not surprised, measured. Rourke stepped closer. "I said, who authorized a civilian on my bridge during pre-launch protocol?" Still no one replied. Commander Jonas Malik, standing 2 consoles away, exhaled slowly. He knew, or at least suspected. But protocol was protocol. He wouldn't break it. Not yet. The Admiral's voice dropped half an octave, but it hit twice as hard. "Escort her off the bridge. Now!" The security detail posted near the forward hatch snapped to attention. 2 enlisted officers, young, rigid, overtrained, moved quickly toward Delia. One gestured to her arm, the other already checking for identification on her lapel. There was none. Delia didn't resist. She didn't speak. She simply nodded once and turned to follow them. One of the junior officers near the navigation bay smirked. "Someone's intern took a wrong turn." The others around him chuckled under their breath. She heard it. Of course she did, but her stride never changed. As she passed Admiral Rourke, her eyes met his. And though she said nothing, something in her gaze, steady, calm, almost pitying, lingered just long enough for him to register it. For a split second, something inside Rourke flickered. Doubt, but it vanished as fast as it came. NT. Observation room. Moments later, the walls in this section of the ship were more steel than screen. No panoramic displays here. Just one long window looking back toward the bridge, separated by soundproof glass and one thick layer of authority. Delia sat alone at the far end of a narrow table, her black notebook reopened. Her pen moved swiftly, clean, small handwriting, almost surgical in how much it captured with so few strokes. She noted which officers turned to look. She noted who avoided eye contact. She marked Admiral Rourke's body language in detail, the kind of confidence that often failed under stress. She listed the names of every enlisted man who smiled when she was escorted away. And she didn't stop writing. Commander Malik stepped into the room briefly. His eyes landed on her notebook, but he said nothing. After a moment, he asked softly, "Was this part of it?" Delia didn't look up. "Of course." He nodded. Quiet, then left. Delia Frost wasn't surprised she was dismissed. She expected it. In fact, it was part of the design. You see, systems often reject what doesn't fit the template, no matter how valuable it may be. A woman without a uniform on a warship? A mind trained in layered encryption? Not command protocol? To them, she looked like a glitch. But sometimes, the glitch is the only thing keeping the system from failing completely. Because the most dangerous form of blindness isn't ignorance, it's certainty. At exactly 0900 hours, Operation Deep Signal commenced. Aboard the aircraft carrier Vigilant, the air was electric with anticipation. The bridge operated like clockwork. Screens flickering with live telemetry, officers barking clear commands, a dozen radar feeds syncing in real time with satellite uplinks and drone support nodes. This wasn't just a drill. This was a message sent to allies, adversaries, and anyone paying close enough attention. On the elevated observation deck stood a half circle of foreign attachés, Korea, Japan, the UK, and one silent figure from an unnamed neutral state. Their expressions were neutral, but their eyes scanned everything. Admiral Clayton Rourke, chest full of medals and reputation hard-earned, stood squarely at the heart of the command floor. He gave the nod. Begin authentication. Lieutenant Cattry's fingers flew across her console. Phase 1 code accepted. Phase 2 validated. Phase 3. She stopped, brows knitted. She retyped. Sir, authentication cycle is not accepting the third-tier launch code. Hurrah! The Admiral approached, towering behind her like a storm cloud forming. Run it again. Aye, sir. Tap, tap, tap. Phase 3. Access denied. The screen flashed red. A soft alarm tone sounded, barely audible at first, just enough to raise neck hairs. Try fallback. Fallback code, denied. Manual override, unresponsive. Across the room, subtle tension turned to alarm. Commander Nakamura stepped in with backup credentials. He tried his own officer keycard, still nothing. Sir, he said slowly, the command tree has locked us out. The system believes an internal compromise has occurred. Admiral Rourke's knuckles turned white around the edge of the console. That's not possible. I reviewed the entire authorization stack myself this morning. Respectfully, sir, the ship doesn't care. Murmurs broke out across the observation deck. The Korean attaché leaned into his translator, whispering a phrase. The interpreter paused, then relayed it to General Blackburn. He says this doesn't inspire confidence. Blackburn didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. The once silent bridge now buzzed with barely contained panic. Fleet-wide channels were still open, but only for reception. Outgoing signals were being blocked. Redundant protocols failed one by one. Then a voice broke the static. Lieutenant Commander Reese at radar control leaned forward. Sir, we just had an anomaly. A blip flashed across the secondary display. I don't recognize the identifier. Was it a drone? No, sir, not an aircraft. It was software-based. A symbol, some kind of circular mark, flashed in place of our tactical map, then disappeared. Show me. Reese replayed the feed frame by frame. There it was, a ring, an eye, stylized. Barely a second in duration. Most didn't recognize it, but one man did. In T, hallway outside the bridge, same moment. Commander Jonas Malik stood just outside, away from the chaos, holding a sealed envelope. He'd kept it in his jacket for over a year. It was given to him before his assignment aboard the Vigilant by someone whose name never appeared on the ship's record. The seal was marked with that same strange eye. Shadow clearance, classified, to be opened only in event of authorization collapse. He opened it. Inside was a single card with one sentence. If this envelope is open, she's already moving. Let her work. His pulse quickened. He turned, heading back toward the bridge at a controlled pace, even as everything around him began to spiral. In it. Bridge, continuous Admiral Rourke now stood surrounded, not by support, but by doubt. General, he said through gritted teeth, this is not sabotage. It's a fail-safe error. I'll have it cleared momentarily. Blackburn remained stoic. Admiral, I've seen war. This doesn't look like a glitch. This looks like someone tested your systems. And they won. A soft ping interrupted them. Cattry pointed. Sir, someone's trying to access the root console remotely. Who? Unknown. The system's allowing them in. And then, the bridge doors opened. Every head turned. Delia Frost stepped into the room. The bridge doors hissed open with a sound so subtle it might have gone unnoticed if the room hadn't already been frozen in tension. Every officer turned, and there she was. Delia Frost. No rank on her shoulders. No badge, no medals, no weapon. Just that worn navy blue jacket, the black notebook in one hand, and a calmness in her eyes that felt almost ancient. Security moved instinctively. Two guards stepped forward from opposite sides of the command deck, their hands tightening near holsters. One of them began to speak. Ma'am, this area is restricted during... But Commander Jonas Malik stepped out from the shadows of the upper platform. His voice cut clean through the space. Not loud, but absolute. Let her pass. The guards froze. For a second, they looked to Admiral Rourke, but Rourke didn't say a word. He watched, eyes sharp, jaw set, as Delia walked forward like she had done it 100 times before. Her pace was steady. Her gaze didn't flicker. No one else moved. Even the foreign observers, moments ago murmuring in diplomatic disdain, stood still, their faces reflecting something new, unease and curiosity. Delia stepped up to the primary console. Her fingers hovered for just a second. Then with a fluid motion, she began to type. But it wasn't typing, really. It was command in motion. Muscle memory refined over decades. A code sequence that no one else in that room, not even the top encryption officer, could recognize. Lines of green text cascaded across the screen. Layers peeled back. Firewalls surrendered. A soft chime echoed from the main terminal. Sovereign access granted. Welcome, Director Frost. The words lingered on the screen like thunder after lightning, and then silence. Every officer, every enlisted sailor, every attaché and general present just stared. Lieutenant Catry slowly rose from her chair. She looked over at the Admiral, then at Delia, her lips parting slightly but no words forming. General Blackburn took a step back, the tight set of his jaw relaxing as understanding washed across his face. The Korean attaché, who had earlier questioned the ship's competence, now watched Delia with narrowed, calculating eyes. And Admiral Rourke? He said nothing, but something inside him shifted. Delia Frost didn't acknowledge the screen. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She merely pulled out her pen and added a single line into the notebook, then closed it. Jonas Malik stepped beside her, a sealed folder in his hand. He handed it to her without a word. She opened it, scanned its contents, then placed it on the console. The page on top read, Preliminary Analysis, Sabotage Attempt Confirmed. Layer 3 Access Breach Identified. Delia turned to face the room. She didn't raise her voice. The drill was compromised. Someone attempted to test the system's response under false command protocols. The lockdown functioned as designed. This ship passed the real test, not the scripted one. A beat passed, then two, and slowly the meaning settled into the room like gravity. They hadn't failed. They had been measured. True authority doesn't shout. It doesn't wave medals or demand attention. It enters without announcement and speaks only when silence has done its job. Delia Frost didn't come to lead. She came to watch, to confirm what others couldn't see. And when the time came, she didn't argue. She simply acted. Lieutenant Catry finally found her voice. Director Frost, she said hesitantly at first, then firmer, like the truth was finally taking form. All fleet channels are restored. Status boards reporting green. Awaiting command. Delia nodded slightly, then turned almost as an afterthought. Admiral Rourke. He met her gaze, troubled, respectful, changed. With your permission, we may resume the exercise. He hesitated. Then after a long breath, he gave a single nod. Proceed. Catry turned back to her console. Fleet-wide broadcast online, initiating Phase 3 sync. The bridge moved again, like a great machine unstuck. Officers resumed motion, data flowed. And in the center of it all, Delia Frost stood still, unseen, yet more visible than anyone else had ever been. As systems roared back to life, one truth echoed through the minds of every witness. This woman, whom they had dismissed, ignored, or outright removed, was not a mistake. She was the last line of defense, not because she commanded the ship, but because she knew what to do when the ship forgot how to command itself. The ship hummed again. Screens flickered calmly in green. Fleet channels flowed cleanly through encrypted relays. Officers returned to their posts, still stealing glances toward the woman who had just salvaged their command from collapse. But Delia Frost didn't linger. She offered no grand speeches, no reprimands. She merely turned from the central console, handed a sealed report to Commander Malik, and nodded to Lieutenant Catry to resume the exercise. Then she walked out, quietly. The storm had passed. Kyuntehin. Flight deck, observation balcony. Later that day, the roar of jet engines thundered across the open sky, sending salt-kissed wind whipping across the upper deck. From a secure glass-enclosed platform above the launch bay, Admiral Clayton Rourke stood beside Delia Frost. He'd requested the meeting personally, not out of protocol, out of need. For the first time in his career, he had no answers, and the only person who did was the one he had dismissed hours earlier. She stood with her hands folded calmly behind her back, eyes watching a fighter jet catch the third wire on landing, not even blinking at the force of impact. Rourke finally broke the silence. "How long have you been on my ship?" She turned slightly. The wind brushed strands of silver hair from her face. 3 years, Admiral." He blinked. 3 years. He looked at her profile, composed, steady, and felt something tighten in his chest. Not embarrassment, something heavier. "I've seen you in the officers' mess," he muttered. "Library once. I thought you were admin support." Delia allowed herself a small smile. "That was the idea. You lived among us all this time? Walked the corridors, listened to briefings, sat at our tables, and no one knew? You weren't supposed to." Rourke let out a slow breath. "Why?" She paused before answering. "Because real security isn't tested in ideal conditions. It's tested in failure. My job was to watch, not prevent mistakes. And to see how your systems, your protocols, your leadership respond when things went wrong. So this was your doing? The lockdown? No. But I allowed it to run its course. That's the only way we learn where the cracks truly are." He turned to face her fully. "And what did you learn?" She finally looked at him, directly. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind. "I learned that your officers followed the chain of command, that your crew performed as trained, that when something appeared on your bridge that didn't fit into any pre-approved box, your instinct was to remove it." He didn't respond. She softened her tone. "It's not a criticism, Admiral. It's a pattern. One I've seen play out on ships, in bases, and command rooms across the globe." "You think I failed?" "No," she said simply. "I think you reacted as expected. The test wasn't whether you recognized me. It was whether your system could still function once I acted." Rourke gripped the railing. Jets launched from the far end of the deck, their afterburners rattling the window. He looked down for a long time, then said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She shook her head. "You followed your orders. So did I. Some people wear their purpose on their sleeve. Rank, medals, uniforms, title placards on polished desks. And some are ghosts by design." Delia Frost didn't want to be seen. Her job wasn't to be admired or followed. It was to see what others couldn't, to record what others missed, to protect systems from within by vanishing into them. Sometimes the hardest part of service is knowing you'll never be saluted, only doubted, until the day you're needed. Rourke finally looked back at her. "What happens now?" She glanced at her watch. "My assignment aboard the Vigilant is complete. Extraction is scheduled for 0200, standard priority evac. I'll be gone before morning shift. And I suppose I won't be told where you're going." "Now you're not cleared for that." He chuckled, just once, a dry, weary sound. "Of course I'm not." She turned to leave but paused at the door. "Admiral, for what it's worth, you run a good ship. It held under pressure. You should be proud of that." He gave a slow nod. "You made sure it held." "No," she said. "I just reminded it how." And then she disappeared down the hall, the way she always had, without sound, without spotlight, without needing to explain a thing. The night air over the Pacific was sharp and cold. At Odu and Nafarn, a single helicopter lifted from the aft deck of the Vigilant. Its rotor blades cut the darkness into fragments of sound. There was no formal farewell, no lineup of saluting officers, no words exchanged over the comms. Delia Frost sat in the back seat, the black notebook on her lap, her face illuminated only by the faint glow of the instrument panel. She didn't look back at the carrier. She never did. To leave unnoticed was part of the role. As the helicopter tilted into the horizon, the lights of the Vigilant faded behind her. A fortress of steel, running drills again, as though nothing had happened. And yet, everyone aboard knew something had changed. Int. Admiral's quarters. Aero 3 Ker. Admiral Rourke stood by the window of his private cabin, watching the last hint of the helicopter's navigation light vanish into the distance. He had spent his entire career believing he understood the chain of command, the layers of control, the unshakable hierarchy of power. Now he wasn't so sure. He turned to his desk. A single envelope lay there. No name, no seal, just his rank handwritten in clean strokes. He opened it, Inside was a brief note. Your ship will hold. You command well. Keep watching the edges. Dr. Yeah. There was no signature beyond those initials, but it was enough. Rourke leaned back in his chair, staring at the note. His mind replayed every moment, the look in her eyes, the way she had entered the bridge without fear, the silence that commanded more respect than any shout ever could. Int. Bridge. Next day, the carrier's operations had returned to normal by morning. Officers moved briskly, reports were compiled, and foreign observers, now silent and polite, prepared for their departure. Yet something subtle lingered in the air. Rourke entered the bridge quietly, his boots clicking on the steel floor. He scanned the crew, his sharp gaze softer than usual. Perhaps for the first time, he truly saw them, beyond rank and duty. Then his eyes caught someone new. At the navigation console stood a young contractor. Average build, plain uniform, unremarkable face. The kind of person one would overlook entirely if not paying close attention. And yet, there was something in the way he stood, the stillness, the watchful eyes. Rourke stared for a beat too long. The young man looked up, gave a small, knowing nod. "Carry on," Rourke said simply. No more was needed. People like Delia Frost don't live for recognition. They don't need their names carved on walls or their faces remembered in ceremonies. Their victories are silent, invisible, uncredited. Their purpose is not glory, it's stability. To ensure that when everything else fails, someone is there to input the code that saves it all. They are the watchers at the edge of the storm, the quiet ones in the back row. And when their work is done, they vanish as if they were never there. Hours later, as the sun set over the ocean, Rourke found himself on the deck alone. The waves shimmered under fading light. He thought of Delia, not as a shadow, not as a ghost, but as the kind of guardian that the world rarely acknowledges. He could almost hear her words again. Real security isn't about stopping the storm. It's about standing so still that the storm forgets you're there. Until it passes. He smiled faintly, something uncharacteristic for a man of his rank. In the crew lounge, whispers about the woman with the black notebook began to sound more like legend than reality. Some dismissed it as a story exaggerated by stress. Others swore they saw her bypass every security lock like the ship belonged to her. No one could prove anything, and that perhaps was the point. Rourke, reading through the final post-exercise reports that evening, noticed something peculiar. The incident log contained only a single line about the failure. Authorization anomaly resolved via protocol redundancy. No mention of Delia Frost. No mention of Director Frost or the shadow override. The story had already been scrubbed from official record, reduced to a technical note. Rourke closed the file with a quiet chuckle. Of course, he muttered, she wouldn't want it any other way. Some people shout to prove they exist, but the rare ones, the ones who truly hold the line, never need to. Delia Frost was one of them. She didn't stay to hear "thank you." She didn't linger to receive applause. She walked away, knowing that silence was the greatest acknowledgement she'd ever get. We live in a world obsessed with visibility. Followers, titles, likes. We're taught that if people don't see what we're doing, then it must not matter. But Delia Frost? She reminds us that the most powerful roles in life are often invisible. In today's society, whether it's the quiet caregiver, the retired veteran who volunteers without recognition, or the grandparent quietly raising a second generation while the world scrolls past them, there are still Delias among us. And maybe the systems they hold up aren't military commands or missile grids. Maybe they're families, communities, or values we don't even know we still depend on until something goes wrong, and suddenly they're the only ones who know what to do. Admiral Rourke once said, "I thought I knew who was in charge. Now I'm not so sure." That moment of realization, that's not just his. It belongs to every manager who overlooked the quiet employee who saved the project. Every child who one day realizes their grandmother had been holding the family together for decades. Every community that runs smoothly, not because of the loudest voice, but because of someone we barely notice, doing their job quietly every single day. So here's a question for you. Who is the Delia Frost in your life? Who is that person, maybe quiet, maybe forgotten, who shows up when it matters most? And maybe more importantly, have you ever been her? Have you ever stepped up without needing praise? Just because it had to be done? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Tell us who your real-life Delia is. Or share a time when you held the line, even if no one noticed. Let's make this more than just a story. Let's make it a conversation about the people who matter after the spotlight fades. Thank you for listening to this story. If it spoke to you, if it made you feel something, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more stories like this one. We tell the stories they don't put on magazine covers, but that stay with you long after the video ends. Because in a world that moves fast, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is remember. Until next time, stay quiet, stay strong, and watch the edges.